can I make a second nomination?
I'm fine with that.
Nominate Rob for vice chair. Seems to me like it'd be a good chance to dip his foot into the water. So that's a thought, at least. Get new people involved.
Okay.
And that's ironic because I was going to nominate Greg.
Well, are you going to, or?
I would like to. I think that you've got the level of experience in the commission that I just don't have quite yet. I'm happy to do it. But
only a year more than you, which is not much in this group.
Well, I defer to the judgment of the group, whichever you think would be the best thing.
Well, how should I proceed?
I think there's been a second to the nomination of you for vice chair.
I did that.
didn't hear anybody second.
Okay.
Where are we at?
Okay.
I didn't hear a second for Rob,
No.
did I?
No.
So
You two
so
could
maybe
just
that
second each other's
dies on the
nomination.
table.
Have a second.
Or which?
I'm sorry.
Do we have a second for Rob's nomination? Okay. I guess the way it stands at this point is that I am the nominee with a seconded, and all in favor signify aye.
Aye.
Okay, I guess I'm it. Traditionally, this board, since we're busy people, has had a second vice chair. Do we have nominations for second vice chair?
I'm nominating Greg.
I'll second that.
I'd be willing to do that.
Any other nominations? Did we have a second? Yeah, we did. Okay. All in favor of the nomination of Greg, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations.
There you go. You missed your chance.
Okay, we have a slate of officers. Moving on down the agenda, let's deal with the approval of the minutes of the December 9th meeting. Do we have any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I would move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor of the minutes as presented, indicate aye.
Aye.
I'm abstaining.
Okay, yeah, I'll get around to that. No, any against? And abstentions? We have two abstentions. Kurt abstaining and Nels abstaining. Correspondence. Mike, any?
I do have something, but it's more of a public comment, so I'll just share that during the public comment period.
Okay. Any other correspondence from the commission? Next item on the agenda is a Transportation Commission report. The Transportation Commission meeting will be tomorrow from 4 to 6 in this room. The meeting will be continuing several of the topics of discussion from previous meetings, largely focused on bicycles, artistic bicycle rack considerations, bicycle route wayfinding signage and bicycle route facilities. And the Transportation Commission will also be doing what most of the commissions do, discussing the possibilities for farmers market booths, which is something that we probably should be doing occasionally in this commission too. So,
Joel, did that discussion include the proposed bicycle shelter here at City Hall? Or was that outside of your discussion at this point?
well,
That topic came to Historic Preservation Commission, is why I'm asking, and I just wondered if you had had the same discussion.
I don't think we had, but can you elaborate?
Well, they're talking about Mike can probably do a better job of this than I, but they're suggesting a grant to get money to build a bicycle shelter along the sidewalk here by City Hall, and it would look a lot like a bus stop. It would be similar, made by the same company that has built those bus stops that are around town, you know. And so it just seemed like there should be a discussion. I'm not sure where it is in the, it came to us from the city's development office, I think.
Yeah,
didn't it?
grants, Elisa
Grants,
Anderson.
right. So we saw a picture of it, and I just presumed you would.
No, we have not discussed that, but I'll ask the question.
You might
tomorrow.
want to,
Yeah.
search that out
Yeah.
a little bit, because
Yeah.
it'd be nice to, I just presumed it was at several commissions, but
Yeah. So
apparently not.
it was with respect to historic preservation issues that.
Well, they
that
were
you
interested in the question of whether it fit with City Hall as a historic
Right.
building, and whether the structure would, and I think it's going to be a glass and steel, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, same as our typical bus shelter design that
Yeah.
we've seen around town. So like Nels mentioned, the same company. I think it was along the lines of the discussion about trying to increase bicycle parking in the
Right.
downtown area. And so that was,
Yeah.
being
and-
adjacent to downtown, that was a reasonable place to put it.
We didn't have a negative response to it at all. The drawing, it was a nice rendering that was brought to our attention, and we didn't seem to be irritated by it. So I would pass that on. You might want to
Yeah.
just.
Yeah. Thanks. The next item on the agenda is open microphone. This commission generally has a time allocated, limited to 15 minutes for members of the public to speak to the commission regarding matters not on the agenda nor currently pending before the commission. Can I assume that you're not interested in any public comment? So that's an invitation to anyone who's watching us on the TV to come on down and provide any input that you wish to this commission. Moving on to item 7.
Mr. Chair.
Aha.
I did have one item. I received an email, or actually Bill did, from Nils Peterson and concerning twin home and townhouse buildings on Alturas, and he has a couple pictures here, and I made some copies for you all, and I just figured I'd share it with the commission.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Is this anything that we would need to have a response to? Is it just for our information?
I think you probably need to read it, and I think Nils is probably looking for a response.
Okay.
It's all about snow.
Okay, thoughts?
It does bring up, I don't know without looking at a plan of this specific thing, but it does bring our attention to, should we continue to have snow in our lives? You know, there are other streets that, as I walk up and down Blaine occasionally, I try not to walk if I can help it, but it seems like I'm required to walk on Blaine down towards Safeway. And once again, one can see there that the dilemma of putting the sidewalk at the curb is really problematic because the snow is pushed onto the sidewalk, and that means that people who live along Blaine have not just the snow to remove, but they've got a pile of snow to remove. And consequently, at least a couple times when I've made the walk, I find myself just walking out in the street because there are only a few people who are able to keep their sidewalk cleared. And what it does is just brings up the larger issue that often we don't think about when we're looking at a subdivision of what, and of course a subdivision on Blaine or on White or on one of the heavy traveled streets is more critical than the ones that are less traveled because that's where the plows go. So it just reminded me, we haven't had this snow for several years, and I found myself fighting the traffic because you're walking on the street becomes narrower and it's not cleared off the sidewalk, and there you are facing. So there's not much we can do about Blaine at this moment, but as we look at new corridors that are heavily used, we just need to keep it in our minds, I think.
Is this an item that would be worthwhile devoting some time to at a further meeting to somehow address the kinds of development, both existing and possible future development, that might be faced with no place to put snow problem? Mike, is there anything that you would be able to do in terms of preparing materials relative to our existing development options that would be worthwhile presenting to the commission?
Yeah, and I take it this is a shows the area that Nils was talking about, huh? Is that true?
Yeah, this is the intersection of Blaine and Alturas. So the one picture that you have is looking right up the block right there. So that's the car that's blocking the sidewalk in the picture that you see. And then the fire hydrant, I believe, is either right here or right there in front of the townhouse development. So, you know, this is our an area of town which has utilized the twin home and townhouse provision of our zoning code since we approved that a few years ago. And so we've got some townhouses, 4 units per building here, one development there and another development right next door, and then you have twin homes. And I think the point that Nils is trying to make is that when you have the driveways side by side with the twin home configuration, then you end up with a lot of breaks in between there are not very many breaks in between the driveways, and so you have these islands of tree lawn where you'd be able to put maybe a street tree or some snow accumulation, but oftentimes those are encompassed with maybe utility boxes and fire hydrants, as in the case of the street here. So that's just problematic when we compound that with snow accumulation, as well as refuse collection and single tote recycling totes that we'll be receiving soon, and it's more a result of an area that's seeing some densification because of twin home or townhouse development. So I think you're going to run into those issues just because of it's not strictly single family. You've got townhouses and twin homes, and so you're going to have twice the number of garbage cans or recycling totes, and then like I said, it just compounds it when you have snow accumulation. But if you look at the lot sizes, typical lot width for these twin homes is about 50 to 60 feet in width, and so for spacing for street trees, you're looking at usually 60 to 80 feet in spacing on street trees anyway, so you'd have the opportunity of placing these in these intermittent tree lawn areas. But those, there could be an issue just because of the utility boxes and not being able to put a tree in every tree lawn island that you see, in this type of development. So I think it was just more of asking the question about, you see some issues with snow removal and ending up maybe over a sidewalk, but if you look at the car that's blocking the sidewalk, our city code prohibits that, and so every garage is going to be at least 20 feet away from the sidewalk in order to meet our zoning code standards. So there is 20 feet there. All they need to do is pull up a little bit further in their driveway to not block the sidewalk. But we could handle that through issuing a citation, things of that nature, so they don't block the sidewalk in the future.
If the snowplows bury the hydrant, whose responsibility is it to uncover it?
I believe it's the adjacent property owner, so it'd be similar to the adjacent property owner is responsible for shoveling of the sidewalk in front of their house, tree lawn maintenance, pruning trees in the tree lawn in front of their house. I believe the fire hydrant falls the responsibility of the adjacent owner, and they have guidelines that they typically send out. I think it's 3 feet clearance, 3 to 5 feet clearance around all sides, just so they can hook up if they need to show up.
So the dilemma here looks like there's nowhere to put the snow. So if it were a really, really bad winter, even if you were trying as a homeowner to be responsible, I mean, maybe there's a problem with this kind of layout, which we thought was a great idea, but where would you put the snow? I don't see any place to put it.
Well, you have the same issue in a lot of areas around town. I mean, downtown towards the core, when you have 24-foot wide streets and on-street parking on both sides of the street, you have that same dilemma. That's why you kind of have the snow berm, and it's problematic to park on the street sometimes. And
So it brings up we've learned with our fancy little machine to take some snow away from downtown, but it just reminds us that certain kinds of development really doesn't work well without an alley. And I know I've had the same experience in Park City, where I spend some weeks every winter. They don't have any alleys because they're on a hill, and there's no place to put the snow. Absolutely. The houses are 15, 16 feet wide. There's an alley, there's a driveway for every house. And so people start to shout at each other. And the only way the city solves it is to get in there and bring in trucks and take the snow away, because it's it's really difficult
Yeah.
in that, and this isn't quite that difficult, but it should remind us not to encourage, it should remind us probably to encourage people who are trying to do the townhouse, row house idea to search for ways to get alleys there, because if you could park your car, if you could have a driveway in the back, then you don't have that same piling of snow issue.
Yeah, this is one of those areas of town where, the topography is such that I don't know how you'd get an alley in the rear of these properties.
Sure.
It slopes so, you can see the cut on this one. If you go out there now, you've got a retaining wall, and it's probably 10 to 15 feet tall for the cut they've had to, actually get a level building lot with that property. And so, it would be great if we could have alleys for all these developments. It's just, our topography here on the Palouse restricts that in some sense.
I mean, it looks to a large extent, this is a problem that's caused by the density, and if we decided that we wanted the density and we want this option to do townhomes, you can't solve all problems. I mean, if you look at that, you've got like 10 dwelling units and 4 on-street parking spaces. And then you start throwing in the fire hydrants and the utility boxes and a place to put the snow and a place to put your totes. It'll be a learning experience. I don't know if it's something that you can really, I don't see any way the code could actually address that without just going counter to wanting an option for more density.
Yeah, it'd be hard to address on the twin homes. In the townhouse provision, we don't allow a continuous curb cut, and so they've had to put in, they wanted to just do a continuous curb cut and just drive right up, but if you recall, we have the provision where you're limited to a certain width here, and the townhouses actually have to share one single driveway, so 2 of them have to share one, and so they've done that here to add those tree lawn areas, and they've actually got one here that's rock and it looks like concrete, but there's one there. Whether or not those are wide enough to accommodate a car on street, is one question. But that's how we try to account for that with the townhouse ordinance.
Well, does anyone think this is worthwhile returning to at a future meeting? Or have we done what we can do with it?
I think it's at least something to discuss at a planning time, and we might want to get somebody from the city's snow removal team to just come and talk about some of the areas that are most critical during snow time. Because you often think about the big highways look like they could be a problem, but because the heat is so, and the fast-moving cars tend to dissipate the snow better there. There's that in-between area where the traffic isn't quite enough to melt the snow, and you have this issue.
Other comments?
I think if we did devote a little bit of time to that notion in planning, then we might not forget about it the next time a project's brought up. I don't know about anybody else's memory, but this is probably not enough to stick it in my brain.
I think I see some agreement that this is worthwhile returning to at some point, Mike, if you can figure out something useful for us to focus on.
Okay.
So,
What would you like to see if I do bring it
well,
back?
I think I kind of liked Nels's suggestion of perhaps involving some of the city snow people in identifying whether there are other similar problem areas that would be useful to talk about.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it'd be just good enough to find 3 or 4 sectors of town where we have an issue, where this issue arises, and then look at them, and it helps us be aware when new subdivisions come in that we're thinking about the various factors that we'd like to help people get to, and that goes for you and staff as well, because if you can head off the concept or the get a development in the right direction, that's always good.
Sure.
It's also possible, I suppose, that it might be useful to limit the number of adjacent twin homes to make sure that they don't inhibit on-street parking, or possibly some places off to the side where you can push snow.
It's a tough issue.
Well,
Joel?
yes.
As long as and I agree, I think that we need to have this discussion, but it sounds like the trash and recycling is going to present a year-round problem, so we might as well be hearing from those folks at the same time.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about it, let's kind of include both issues if we could.
Okay.
Maybe we could do some shared readings on street design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently the city is thinking more about this kind of an area when they said we bring your tub out to the front street. These guys don't have a choice, but some people do.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. The next item on the agenda is our public hearing, and the order of the public hearing is that we will open the public hearing, which I will do now. The public hearing is now opened. We will first hear from staff on presentation of the application. That will be followed by a time for the applicant to present information in support of the application. If we had public here, beyond the applicant, we would provide time for testimony in favor of the application, testimony in opposition, or testimony of a general nature, followed by rebuttal time, and I would close the hearing and we would discuss the meeting. So go ahead, Mike, with the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Before you tonight, we have a request for annexation at 3151 and 3225 Robinson Park Road. Along with that annexation is review of the comprehensive plan land use designation, as well as a rezoning request for the two properties. So the applicant's request includes three components. The first one, like I mentioned, is the annexation of 3.34 acres of property. You have an approximately 1 acre property as well as a 2.34 acre property before you tonight. The adoption of the current comprehensive plan land use designation of auto urban residential and suburban commercial, and those are the current designations by the comp plan, as well as a proposed rezoning of the property from agricultural forestry to a combination of R1 and neighborhood business. So, just to get the record straight, prior to annexation, Planning and Zoning Commission is required to review the subject property and provide the City Council with a recommendation regarding the appropriate future land use, as well as the zoning designations to be applied to the subject property upon annexation. So, we won't be acting upon the annexation. We'll just be recommending the future land use designation as well as the zone upon annexation. So, I've highlighted the property here in red in the center of your screen. You've got the White Avenue roundabout here to the west side. This is Robinson Park Road. Provides direct access to the property. This orange line represents the current city limits boundary. This would be the existing 2.34 acre property. And this is the adjacent approximately 1 acre property. Currently houses the Shireman's Event Center. You can see the white building in the northeast corner. The 2.34 acre property contains a single-family dwelling as well as a couple outbuildings, one here and I believe a barn here to the west side. Property is almost completely surrounded by either agricultural land to the east and to the northeast or low-density single-family residential. And so you've got a lot of the rolling hills additions there to the northwest. You've got Southgate Third Edition to the south. This is actually the city park property, Milton Arthur Park, which is, I believe, seeded this last year, and so that'll be developed pretty quickly. The rest of that is in Southgate Third, so currently putting in some of the infrastructure for that development, but a lot of it remains undeveloped. We've got a topography map of the area. As you can see, the subject property is relatively flat, slopes down a little bit from the street, and then slopes a little bit in the southeast corner, but a majority of it's pretty flat. This is the comprehensive plan land use designation. All the area within the city is designated as neighborhood conservation. We have suburban commercial is the pink that you see, and that covers the event center property. And then all the yellow you see is auto urban residential. Typically the land surrounding the city is that auto urban residential designation. What that means, according to the comprehensive plan, those areas generally anticipated to be developed for low to moderate density residential, and typically or commonly observed densities between 3 and 7 units per acre. Appropriate current zoning for auto urban residential include R1, R2, and R3. R3 is in conjunction with PUDs. Suburban commercial designation intended to provide local and neighborhood commercial services in a manner that is compatible with a residential neighborhood environment. Lands appropriate for this designation include areas in close proximity to higher density residential development at intersections of designated collector or arterial streets, which are near residential development. The suburban commercial designation is most appropriately zoned neighborhood business. So that brings us to the zoning of the area. Like I mentioned before, subject properties zoned agricultural forestry, as well as the immediately adjacent areas that are out in the area of city impact there. Within the city limits, we've got a combination. You have an R1. You actually have an R3 in Southgate Third. When they rezoned that area and subdivided it, they had just utilized that R3 designation just to achieve smaller lot sizes. So they're still restricted to single family. It's just they got a little bit smaller lot sizes within that area. So immediately adjacent to the south is R1 with the park, as well as a few other properties down Robinson Park Road. Within the Rolling Hills additions there, Panorama, Fairview, those are zoned R2. That's a ramp in R3 that shouldn't be there. So that is R2. And this would be the proposed designation, so rezoning the event center property to neighborhood business and the house property to R1, which is consistent with the areas to the south and to the west for the R1 designation. So what R1 is our lowest, not our lowest, but it's a low-density residential zone. It's appropriately applied in the following circumstances where single-family dwellings predominate the area. The physical character of the area does not lend it to more intense development, either by virtue of irregular topography, restricted access, division of the land into subdivision lots of a size greater than the minimum lot size required by this zoning district, or the application of the plan policies to the land in question. Neighborhood business is our lowest intensity commercial zone. It's intended to apply to areas less than 2 acres in size, where commercial services may be provided in convenient locations, serving adjoining residential neighborhoods rather than the community at whole. Commercial services permitted are those where traffic generation, access requirements, impacts of lighting, neighborhood need for service, and noise production will be compatible with the surrounding residential area. And within that zone, permitted uses include residential uses, retail sales, personal services, restaurants, professional offices, daycare facilities, churches, and community neighborhood centers. Just wanted to briefly go over utilities, which are currently extended to the current city limits boundary. So we've got a water main here represented in green. This would be a storm sewer main in blue, and you also have a sanitary sewer main there. It looks like a black line. The triangle would represent a fire hydrant there. So Brings us to the staff's recommendation tonight is that the commission conduct a public hearing, and upon consideration of any public testimony received, as well as the relevant criteria and standards, to recommend approval of the proposed auto-urban residential and suburban commercial land use designations in the rezone from agricultural forestry to R1 and neighborhood business to the city council. And I'd certainly be able to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions?
There's no subdividing aspect to this, right?
No subdivision plat associated with it. It's strictly just an annexation, comp plan adoption, and rezoning.
Okay, if there are no,
Joel,
Yeah.
could the R1 portion of this, could that subsequently be subdivided?
Yeah, it certainly could. 9,600 square feet is the minimum lot size for that zone, and so it's a 2.34 acre property. So, at some point in the future, if they wanted to go through a subdivision plat, they could certainly divide the property.
other questions? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to a presentation by the applicant. Can you please state your name and address for the record?
Terry Sharman, 3151 Robinson Park Road. What we did, they brought the water meter to on our side of our property, and that's where we thought, well, we might as well get water. We were just going to get the water, but we were kind of convinced we might as well go through the whole deal, and it kind of makes sense to do it. So kind of that's, to get it zoned from ag forest to the kind of, I guess the city's always had it in their comp plan to have this.
Yeah, it's always been designated through the comp plan as auto-urban residential and suburban commercial, which would point to those two zoning classifications. Yeah.
We don't plan on doing anything other than just getting water.
Are there questions for Terry? Go ahead.
You didn't have too many people turn out for your neighborhood meeting, so I take it no one had an
No,
objection?
they just wanted to come visit. That was great.
Other questions? One I have is on the slides I've seen there, the activity center seems to be located very, very close to the eastern boundary.
It is really close. It is.
I guess I was curious why you stopped at that point.
That would be my dad. I don't know, in the old days they just built, and I don't know if they got permission or not, but that's what he did, and it is. It's really close.
That is your property boundary.
It is. It's within our property.
Because I see one of the maps that you presented, Mike, that shows the comprehensive plan map showing a block of orange, I believe it is, further on to the east beyond that property boundary. I was wondering
I saw
what
that too. That was for the neighborhood business.
Yeah.
And it went past.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times when you have comprehensive plan maps, it's, the general area would need to be this designation, and usually it's not parcel level accuracy, I'd say, but it was probably just an error when we adopted the comprehensive plan in 2009 that it actually didn't follow the property boundary. I know there was a number of errors with our park boundaries, when we identified those in the comprehensive plan that ended up being of a different size and shape than what the consultant had put on there, and we fixed a large majority of those, but we'll get that cleaned up, if this should be adopted for suburban commercial.
Yeah. So it's not an issue of concern?
No.
Okay.
When do you think that building might have been built?
The burp.
burp.
Yeah. 1969. 1969 is when.
69.
Actually, that's when he opened it. So somewhere in there is when they, probably the winter of 68 or something, they were putting it together.
Yeah, I must have gone there when it was.
It does seem unusual. It's like they turned it up and the building just kind of fell down into the corner.
Yeah.
And, but I thought maybe it was even built before that time, because it can't be much of a setback on the back, on the eastern boundary, could it?
Yeah. Well, whatever the setback is, is grandfathered.
Joe, if I can add, will the water be then, water and sewer connected to both the residents and the
Just
facility?
water. Just water.
Just water, not sewer?
No sewer.
So remain on
Septic.
septic?
Yeah.
For both facilities?
Yes, yes.
Any other questions? Thank you, Terry. Given that we don't have any further, unless you would like to talk? I will close the public hearing, and we can discuss what we want to do.
It seems like a perfectly reasonable request all the way along. I certainly don't have any issues with approving or recommending approval for all three issues. I don't know if you want to have further discussion or if you want to just go straight into.
Why don't you just make a
I'll move that we, Mike, you'll have to help me here. We recommend to City Council the annexation, and we recommend rezone.
I don't think we really even need to
go
make any
through-
recommendation on annexation. I think it's
Okay.
only on the rezone and the
So
comp
we
plan.
recommend rezone and,
Yeah, recommend approval of the comprehensive plan land use designation. It's going to remain the same. And then recommend approval of the rezoning from agricultural forestry to R1 and
I
B.
recommend what he said. Or
Is-
move what he said.
Is there a second?
I second that, yeah.
Any further discussion? Not hearing any, I think we're ready to vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Not hearing any, the motion passes. Yes?
Criteria. relevant
Yes,
criteria.
we do have to deal with criteria. Reason statement on relevant criteria. Let me just, let's deal first with the zoning boundary issue. You have in your packet the items that we have to talk about. Item 1, the proposed rezone is or is not in general conformance with the comp plan.
If you can just,
Yeah.
direct staff to
Yeah.
write these.
Well, I was just
You
wondering
could
if
take a
anybody
quick-
had any particular items that,
Can't see any argument that's going to get in your way, Mike, in writing it. It seems to me, it's as Rob said, it's pretty straightforward, so I would move that staff be directed to write the reasoned criterion and statement for approval next time.
do we have a second? Second. Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Staff is directed to prepare the reason statements. Okay, thank you. We have
Happy
approved.
drinking.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is to continue our ongoing discussion of the nature of the relevant criteria and reasons statements for the various things that we do as a commission. So thanks. So Mike?
So we've gone through variance, conditional and special use permits, and planning and developments previously, and now we're on to comp plan amendments and rezones. Figured we'd knock them both out at the same time just because they're so similar. And I've got comprehensive plan amendments up first, and so what we always do is take a look at what state statutes say about comp plan amendments. And reading through that section doesn't really give us any direction on the criteria, really just states kind of procedural notice approval requirements. And I've gone through, and what we do have in the code is for notice and approval and all those requirements is consistent with state code, and so we don't need to do anything there. We're starting to dive into the ones that currently aren't codified. So I think when we went over all the criteria at the beginning, there was a certain number that we have included within our applications. So the applicants are aware, staff's aware, and all the commission's aware, and the council is aware of what the criteria are to approve these types of land use actions, but we don't actually have them in our code. So part of this is including or codifying the criteria for these three, and I think it's mainly comp plan, rezone, and subdivision are the ones that currently aren't in our code. So it'll be good to have those included. Looking at our current criteria, we go through, just running through these. Number one, proposed comprehensive plan map amendments consistent with the comp plan purposes, goals, objectives, and policies. So this is older language, and so this was from our 99 comp plan where we did have purposes, goals, objectives, and policies. We've moved to more of goals, objectives, and implementation actions, and so we just probably need to update that in our criteria. The next one, a significant change of circumstance has occurred, and then they give some examples that are not reflected within the current comp plan and reflects an appropriate change in the community's vision and or needs. And so the examples they give are, new development, redevelopment, land use patterns or trends, traffic patterns, volume, market demands, population needs, capital improvements, or just new or revised city plans. Moving on, the proposed change is logical and harmonious with the land use pattern for the area. Existing anticipated land use is the vicinity of the subject property in the comprehensive plan land use designation map. And so just making sure that the change is going to be compatible with the surrounding area, and that it's kind of a logical and orderly land use designation configuration is created with the proposed change. Then we move on to increased demand for public services, which could result from the comp plan amendment, can be made available to the area. So just making sure that school districts are going to be able to serve maybe an increase in population. We're going to have water, sewer that's going to be able to be extended to the property to serve, things of that nature. Police services, fire services are going to be able to respond to that area. I move on to the proposed change would be a benefit to the public, and then the proposed would not cause adverse, unmitigable impacts to public service, infrastructure, facilities, or other properties in the vicinity. So I know a previous chair that had an issue with the word unmitigable. So I did look it up. It is in the dictionary. Although they use immitigable a little bit more, I think Word doesn't like it. They refer you to immitigable. So, like we had done before, looked at other jurisdictions, tried to keep it within the state, but comp plans were a little bit harder because a lot of them don't, like we don't, codify the criteria. And so I had a tough time rounding up some examples for comp plans. A lot, if you can't find it in the code itself, usually you can look at maybe a land use application. Usually you'll find it there. I was having trouble even finding it within the applications, and so I did find Boise's, and they kind of go through a lot of the same ones that we cover, just saying a little bit differently. Public convenience or necessity, is required for a public convenience or necessity, or for the general welfare of the community. So a lot of this ties back to the general life safety and welfare of the community. It's necessary to address changes and conditions within the community that have occurred since the Boise City Comprehensive Plan was adopted, or is necessary to correct one or more goal, objective, or policy that exists in the plan. So this is similar to one of the criteria that we have, the changing conditions. It's compliance with the spells out the goals, objectives, policies, but really tying it back to the comprehensive plan. Will not create inconsistencies between the goals, objectives, policies within or between any chapter of the comprehensive plan, and it will not place an undue burden on transportation or other public facilities in the area, and does not adversely impact the delivery of services by any political subdivision providing services. And they had, within Boise's, they'd included this, and it'll be a little more clear when we go through the rezone criteria. Under LUPA, Local Land Use Planning Act, the state statutes, actually, that's one of the criteria they state within the rezone, and so they've carried it over. I think what we'll probably do is, at least staff will maybe propose kind of a similar language for both comp plan and rezone, just to tie it in with the state statutes. Lewiston, I didn't find any criteria, but just mainly, a couple questions that they asked within the application that they needed the applicant to answer. Relates to the conditions that have changed in the area, so similar to what we have and what Boise has, and how the requested amendment addresses those changes. So it doesn't really inform us a whole lot. Post Falls was the same. Just had a couple questions within their application. Why it's necessary, what change required this amendment, and then a statement of the perceived effects that the proposed change would have on the city. Pullman across the border have quite a bit more extensive criteria, and so they go through, the effect on environment, economic environment, social environment, environmental, impact on adjacent land uses, and then they, almost always tie it back to the impact on the, our public facilities in town. It's to be the benefit of the neighborhood, city, and region. Current projected population density in the area is proposed to be changed in the surrounding area. Effect of the proposed change upon other aspects of the comp plan. And then it goes through a couple of general findings, as long as they promote the health, safety, welfare, and would be a benefit to the residents of the city. So they have all those criteria, and then they make you adopt some findings as well as part of that. So coming back to our comp plan criteria, not as many to compare as previous relevant criteria for variances or conditional use permits, but we do have some. Looking at the changes that, staff's looked at this and all the other criteria, and I think that, we've come up with some language here. I thought I'd shop it by you to see what you thought, but, number one, proposed comprehensive plan amendment is consistent with comprehensive plan goals, objectives, and implementation actions. So really just what we have right now for number one, only updating it to the current language we have in the 2009 comp plan. Proposed comp plan amendment would provide for a logical and orderly location of land uses, community services, and facilities. The uses expected to occur as a result of the comprehensive plan amendment will be compatible with the surrounding area. The size, type, and density of development expected to occur as a result of the comprehensive plan amendment will not place an undue burden upon delivery of services provided by any political subdivision within the planning jurisdiction. And so this is, like I mentioned before, this is that same language from Local Land Use Planning Act that we've just proposed to be inserted within the comp plan. Just because comp plans and rezones, you're really looking at a lot of the same things. They're really similar, and we think that the criteria should probably reflect that. And then that brings us to the last one. The proposed comprehensive plan amendment is deemed to be appropriate in consideration of changing conditions within the community that are not reflected within the current comprehensive plan. And then include the parentheses at the end. carrying over the same examples that we had with our criteria. So that's pretty much taking number 2 there and changing the wording a little bit to update it and give a little more predictability to everybody involved in the process. So that's our crack at it. And I'd certainly like to hear your thoughts.
Comments? You're doing an excellent job.
Thank you. Yeah, it's usually these are 3 or 4 iterations back and forth between internally between staff, and then it's maybe trying to wordsmith one to make it sound right. It changes maybe 10 times, and then we arrive at something that sounds good. So.
Yeah.
Mike, how often is it that a request to change the comprehensive plan comes up?
Well, by state law, you're only allowed to change it like a map, or actually it's, strictly comprehensive plan. You're only allowed to change it every 6 months. So it's not very often. We had the Harvest Hills, I think was our last one, where they proposed to change the comprehensive plan designation. That'll still be advancing to council, but hasn't made it there yet. So we actually haven't changed anything. The annexation that you heard earlier tonight, that wouldn't be a change. That would just be adopting what it's currently designated as. So usually we go maybe 2-3 years before we see a change. It's not very often. I think the last time I had to do relevant criteria was 2012. We had Ridgeview Estates, and they actually, same thing as the Shireman annexation, it was auto-urban residential, and so they just adopted that current land use designation, and so we didn't actually have to change it. So I don't know that we've done one since I've been here, which is about 7-8 years. So it's pretty rare.
It seems to me that I do remember when things were happening a bit faster a number of years ago, that occasionally things would get blocked up because a change had been made, and there was a proposed new change that couldn't be made because we were within the 6 months.
Yeah, and I think that was probably a result of our old comprehensive plan reaching that 10-year mark, and so it really needed to be updated. So when we updated it back in 2009, we probably we captured a lot of maybe the issues and predicted what was going to happen, and so we could appropriately designate certain areas. And so I think that's probably why we haven't seen one ever since 2009 is because we changed it at that point, and I guess we did a good job. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Other comments on the proposed language?
Seems a little tighter
Yeah.
Yeah.
And simpler.
and simpler. More simple? Simple.
Okay, shall I
Proceed.
move on to rezone?
Proceed.
Okay. So as we go through this, you'll probably notice a lot of the similarities between other jurisdictions' comp plan amendment language and their rezone language. So when we look at Local Land Use Planning Act, a lot of the procedural notice requirements we already have within our code. We didn't see any changes that we need to make there. But there are a couple sections that are hidden within those paragraphs that point to a couple criteria, and the first one is states that particular consideration shall be given to the effects of any proposed zone change upon the delivery of services by any political subdivision providing public services, to include school districts within the planning jurisdiction. And so you see a lot of carryover with that language just because it cites it within the Idaho statutes. And then later on, it states that the governing board shall analyze proposed changes to zoning ordinance to ensure they're not in conflict with the policies of the adopted comprehensive plan. So obviously we need to tie it back to the comprehensive plan. Those are two criteria that they give you within the Local Land Use Planning Act that are probably a good idea just to be consistent with Idaho code to include those maybe in your criteria. So looking at our present criteria, we only have 4. The first one is conformance with the comprehensive plan, so we already have one of the 2 of Idaho statutes. The proposed rezone does not present foreseen unmitigable impacts of incompatible uses or development being located in the same vicinity. Once again, getting tied back to presents maybe a logical and orderly configuration and doesn't have an impact on the surrounding area. The proposed rezone is not a per se invalid spot zoning. An example, it is not arbitrary, that it does not serve the general public interest, and that it is not solely for private gain. And so, typically spot zoning is a term with a negative connotation, and it's usually invalid spot zoning is what's really illegal, and that's really the definition of what an illegal or an invalid spot zone is. It's arbitrary, does not serve the general public interest, and is solely for private gain. But we don't define that anywhere. Idaho statutes don't define that. We don't define it in our code. You don't really see that used anywhere, a whole lot of places. And so probably recommend getting rid of that and replacing it with language that talks about, general health, safety, welfare of the community, which it really points to. The last one is size, type, density of development expected to occur on the subject property suitable for the area, will not unduly burden the neighborhood, public infrastructure, environmental resources. Went through. Boise's is pretty simple. One, it requires compliance with the comp plan. It's in the best interest of the public convenience and general welfare, and maintains and preserves compatibility with surrounding zoning and development. Lewiston, and they actually just updated this in summer of 2015, so it's pretty fresh. They tend to have criteria that's similar to ours. Could be that the previous community development director is down there in Lewiston now. Proposed rezones in conformance with the comp plan. The land's well suited or is better suited for the proposed zoning district than the existing. Proposed rezone does not present immitigable, so I'm sure he right-clicked on unmitigable and it brought up immitigable, so that's what they went with. Impacts of compatible uses or development being located in the same vicinity. Affects the proposed rezone anticipated to place an undue burden upon delivery of services, providing by any political subdivision within the planning jurisdiction, including school districts. So that's the exact same language that's in the Idaho code. So I'm sure he read that and inserted that in their criteria because of LUPA. And then size, type, intensity of the development expected to occur on the property as a result of the rezoning is suitable for the area and will not unduly burden the neighborhood, public infrastructure, and environmental resources. So you can kind of see a trend, comp plan fitting in with the surrounding area, ties back to the general health, safety, welfare, the public at large. Does not place an undue burden on delivery of services. Post Falls, I don't believe this is one of those that I couldn't find criteria, so this was within their rezone application. They had asked these questions: how the proposed amendment relates to the comp plan, availability of public facilities, and compatibility with the surrounding area. So, you see that trend. Then Idaho Falls is, I guess, showing their agricultural roots here. So they have a little bit different criteria than I've seen in all the ones that I've reviewed. First sentence states out with saying that it should be in harmony with the city's comp plan as required by Idaho Code section, and that's just the Local Land Use Planning Act, the rezone chapter. So that would just be it doesn't necessarily say harmony, it just has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And then it goes on to say, because the comprehensive plan provides only general guidance for zoning decisions, Planning Commission should also take the following considerations into account: potential for disruption of agricultural, irrigation, and drainage systems, damaged neighborhood properties or public facilities, culverts, streets, bridges, storm drains from accelerated stormwater, snow melt runoff, traffic generation as a result of the development. And then you got to go through all these public services, and they want to review the capacity for the services, and examples: schools, emergency medical services, water, sewer, other public facilities, park rec services. Then goes on to for nuisances or health or safety hazards that could have an adverse effect on adjoining properties, recent changes in land use on adjoining parcels or in the neighborhood of the proposed zone map amendment. And then across the border in Pullman, they have some, it's similar to Idaho Falls in that they have a lot of criteria, and it's really detailed. They go through the comp plan, making sure it's consistent with the zoning ordinance, relationship to the surrounding area, has there been changes to the area, the suitability of the property. This is odd, value, relative gain to the public health, safety, welfare compared to a potential increase or decrease in value to the property owners. That's you don't see that anywhere else. That's unique to Pullman. Errors, the proposal necessary to correct an error, compatibility, and then you have special criteria. I didn't list all those, but they have special criteria depending upon what zoning district you're in, and they list about 5 or 6 zones, and then just have specific criteria to just those zones. I tracked down Missoula's, and they kind of have a growth management act. I think I can't tell you what the acronym MCA stands for, but that's really what that is. Then they go through a whole list just to make sure it's consistent with that, the growth policy, safety from fire or other dangers, public health, safety, welfare. You've got all the public services that they address, reasonable provision of adequate light and air. Zoning considers an effect on motorized or non-motorized transportation systems, promotion of urban growth, kind of all growth management issues there. Whether a proposed zoning amendment corrects an error, inconsistency, whether a proposed amendment is in the best interest of the city as a whole. So, going back to our criteria, I think we had looked through these, and there's a lot of overlap, like I had mentioned before, between comp plan and rezones. The first one, almost the same language. I think it is the same language consistent with the comp plan and the goals, objectives, and implementation actions. We provide for the logical and orderly location of land uses and community services and facilities. Uses expected to occur as a result of the rezone will be compatible with the surrounding area. Size, type, and density of development expected to occur as a result of the rezone will not place an undue burden upon delivery of services provided by any political subdivision within the planning jurisdiction. So the LUPA language, and then followed by the size, type, and density of development expected to occur as a result of the rezone can be adequately served by existing transportation network, public facilities, and services. So those are, number 4 and number 5 are similar, and we didn't do number 5 in comprehensive plan because it seems like that relates to more of the immediate area. Whereas, your comprehensive plan, you're looking at more of a broad picture, and so you're looking at delivery of services by political subdivisions within the planning jurisdiction, and it gives an opportunity for the rezone. At the rezone level, you're looking a little bit more closely at the surrounding area and adjacent uses, and you want maybe a little bit more higher level of review for the existing transportation network and adjacent public facilities and services, water, sewer. To the property, and so they may seem a little bit similar, but I think there's some differences there that are probably important in the rezone. So,
Was the slide just before this our original?
yeah, that's what we currently have.
I'm
yeah.
glad you got rid of that not solely for private gain. That's really irritated me for quite a long time. So I like what you've got.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it's an improvement.
I was going to agree that it's the spot zoning issue and the language surrounding it has been a problem as long as I've been on the commission, trying to figure out exactly what it meant.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, a good example is tonight, you have neighborhood business, and you could say that's a spot zone, because it's 1 acre in size, it's the only zone around there, but it's intended because it's supposed to deliver, services to the surrounding neighborhood.
I just feel so much better with saying this is what we want. We want it to be for the welfare of the city. It wants to be logical. It wants to be good. I don't like the comments where they say it shouldn't be, can't be spot zoning, can't be for private gain. I mean, those are kind of negative responses rather than what we're trying to do is not get somebody hung up on what a spot zone is, but do something that makes the city better. And I really like that stance. So I think we're on the right. I think you're doing the right thing, Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tim?
After seeing the detail, though, of Missoula's in particular, do you think when we speak in such broad terms, as most of these are, not just ours, but the other cities too, that there's a chance that we overlook things because we're speaking in more generalized terms, and then we live to regret it because we didn't think of something, because we didn't get specific enough? And I'm not making a case that I think that's true. I'm just wondering if that's true.
Well, I think certainly if these are, like you said, real broad, a lot of them are broad, but I think that if you have an issue like that, it could be under the umbrella of one of these criteria. I think a lot of those that are really detailed may box you into somewhere that you don't want to be. And I think that, so when we've gone through this, we've kind of had that question internally about maybe we should get really detailed about, what it is we want. But, in the end, I think you can get as detailed as you want to be with the criteria without having to box yourself into all these specific criteria that you may be an issue, may not. And it may make it an issue when it's not an issue, type of thing.
Yeah.
I guess what I wonder is that for us sitting here, is there some other layer that can be available to us so that we don't overlook things that we wish we hadn't overlooked? Not that this isn't fine in its broadness, but a tool for us to use when this sort of proposal comes before us and someone wants a rezone, so that we don't forget to think of the certain things that we really do want to think of. Am I making sense by what I'm saying? I do this all the time. I've got the broad idea in my mind about something at work, and then I, 2 days later, think, darn, wish I'd had notes to remind me to think about.
I think you're right, but I think that's what a purpose that the public hearings serve, provided people show up. You get people, and things where you have things like rezone, you tend to get more people showing up. But you do have other people. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that other thing? And
Yeah.
I know that sometimes I've sat here during those hearings and no, I didn't think of that.
Right. Yes.
And sometimes we've backed off of things and after a public hearing and thought, you know what, we didn't consider that. Let's step back and give it some more thought before we move forward.
I mean, usually, again, my experience has been at the co-op, if you keep those things, that level of regulation fairly loose and fairly broad and fairly general, it makes it a lot easier to work with. It makes it a lot more understandable. Kind of the trade-off is it makes you more dependent on city staff to interpret, that's doing the actual interpretation of these broad standards, and it makes you more dependent on the public turning out.
Oh, sure.
To-
I guess I was thinking more of not necessarily at that level so that it's not in the code, it's not part of the zoning code, but more of a hands-on little tool, don't forget about.
Checklist.
I guess so, yeah, because I'm a big checklist person. Because I just have too much to remember, and I know we've made decisions here that a week later I thought of something, it's like, oh, boy, I wish I had thought of that at the time because I believe it was really important.
I mean, it's almost like looking at the Missoula Code. It's kind of like they were trying to do that, but they did it by adding stuff in.
Right, and I don't know
And-
that I
and
would want
boy.
it added in, but is there some way we could come up with something that was more just hands-on use for the commission?
I think it's more, I think the more important issue, I mean, these words are fine, but I think the whole idea of trying to run a village and sharing the knowledge in an open way is what it's really all about. And having the thing I've enjoyed over the last 16, 18 years is having a diversity of opinions on this board that really brings things forward. So I feel like I'm more, and I'm less worried about a sentence here than I am about just having thoughtful people to work with, because it's been really useful and helpful to me. I just, sometimes your brain just doesn't quite get in gear, and the person down the board is all over it, and I think I think that's a good part about government at our level. We don't have much pressure on us in this town. Let's face it, we really would like to encourage development wherever we could see it. I mean, in some big cities, you're trying to stop things all the time because there's all kinds of whimsy and stuff going on. We don't have nearly as much development as we probably wish we could have, and it puts us in a slightly different light. At least there are many a time when I'm wondering, gosh, wish there was something else that was going on, that we'd like to see just a little bit more growth.
Well, and I've seen it here almost getting to the point of begging the public to come pressure us.
Right.
So, any specific comments on the proposed criteria?
I think those are a very positive step in the.
I think just by looking at the various cities, and some short, some long, some more detailed, some less detailed, I just am not convinced it's that critical. You want to pay attention to them, and we, every 10 years, get serious about rethinking the whole ball of wax, but I think this is a good process.
And I think it strikes a good balance.
Okay, I think, anything further?
No. Yeah, I think we have subdivisions left, and then that should wrap it up. So we'll review that next meeting, and then hopefully have some type of code amendment draft that we can bring forward and take a look at and review at that point.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is shared readings.
I looked on the website and I didn't see any new.
Yeah, I think Wendy had suggested just adding that, just making sure that the commission wanted to move forward with shared readings because she thought it was really important.
Greg made a suggestion that maybe we ought to
Street
What was
design,
your
street
suggestion?
design kind of stuff. Street, readings on street design.
readings on street design.
Okay.
There must be cities that know how to build a street where you can put all your dumpsters and
Well,
your
and advantages
snow
and disadvantages thereof.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if somebody came at this point with a plan for a neighborhood, I would have no idea to assess whether a street was adequately designed.
So in special consideration to snow removal and refuse collection, things like that.
Collection.
Yeah. It sounds like one of the core issues is, you take away an alley for all of those old uses that it was done, and then how do you face designing the actual street if that's all you've got to deal with that stuff?
Okay.
One of the things that we could do that is, that wouldn't take a lot of money to do, but we could, a couple of times a year, do a field trip and go out and just look at our streets. If you take the time to go from Maine to Mountain View, you can look at the last 50 years or 60 years and see changes that have happened in the way we developed and how utterly ridiculous we got in the 60s and 70s, saving money a little bit in the first instance, but not building any sidewalks, so that little children are forced to walk in the street whether they want to or not. Grandmas and grandpas get to walk in the street. I mean, so I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to do to just take a couple of hours and go to a section of town and talk about it. Because, and especially with some of the new areas out in the out on White Avenue, because we've seen some new kind of development potentials there. Compare them with what we have in the Fort Russell or in some of the older subdivisions. And then there's flatland and hill land, and for a long time we were looking at, I know Joel and I have been here looking at subdivisions going in the hills, and it's really difficult to do the right thing when you're in a hill condition. You're getting connections and making things work, even though it seems to be a good use of land. But we could do some of that. We could just pick an area and take a couple of hours and go out and talk about it, and it might be useful for us when the weather's good.
Yeah.
Or with those big snow berms.
Well, that's why I was just telling my story about, because I probably don't walk nearly as much as I should, but somehow getting to Les Schwab is something that it's a nice mile walk, and walking down Blaine is a travesty. Actually, it's just really ugly when we've had a big snow.
Yeah.
And so you go down the way saying, I wonder why this family must have just broken their back trying to get there. Meanwhile, there were very few parts, very few extended sidewalks that were clear soon after our snowfall.
Yeah.
It would make it a bigger pain, but it would be a bit more educational to go out on the tour when there is a foot of snow on the ground to see what's working and what's not. Yeah.
I'll wear my yak tracks.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, are we ready for adjournment? We are adjourned.